Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next round of Formula One as it heads to Azerbaijan to race around the streets of Baku. Now, it does feel very odd to say that we're coming up to Baku at the end of the season, as we've had it at the beginning of the season in the last few years. It really is just messing with my head this season now that they tried to move towards this more economical and, common sense style of race scheduling. So it feels very interesting to be coming to Azerbaijan this late into the season, but nonetheless, we are here to talk about it, specifically our predictions for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix here in 2024. We're coming off of a Monza race, the home race for Ferrari, who saw Charles Leclerc pull off an absolute strategic masterclass for once. I know Ferrari. We know we know their history, but they managed to pull it off to a Charles Leclerc victory and an Oscar Piastri P2 having the win ripped away from him, and a Lando Norris P3 in Italy. But now we head to the streets, back on a street circuit once again, as the European leg of the season is now officially over. Hard to believe we're already here, but nonetheless, we move forward. Let's go ahead, let's jump on into our predictions for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. We're going to be making predictions for our biggest positive surprise, our biggest disappointment, our qualifying top three, our race podium, and then of course we'll round things out with our one crazy prediction. Now, if you haven't already, subscribe down below. We'd love you to join our little community here. We'd love to have you. Leave a comment down below along with our predictions to see what you think is going to happen and see how many you can get right. I'd be fascinated to know what you guys think is going to happen. But let's go ahead, let's jump on into this thing with our biggest positive surprise. Kicking things off with biggest positive surprise, but before we do, you'll notice as we go through these predictions a nice black box that appears along the bottom edge of the screen as we make our predictions, showing my community's predictions. That's right, I love to give my community an opportunity to have their predictions heard on the video. And if you're interested in joining our sort of little predictions points championship, even though we are sort of coming down to the end of the season, we'd love to have you. You can click the link down below, join the Discord, and every week leading up to a Grand Prix weekend, I'll make a call for these same predictions and you can have your voice heard there and be added to our little championship. We love having a little back and forth, a little bit of ribbing here and there to see who can get the most points on the weekend without being the most boring. It's a lot of fun. We've had a lot of fun with it this season, and we'd love you to join in if you wish. But that said, biggest positive surprise, I am going with Charles Leclerc. Now, I know what you're saying. How could it get even better than winning Monza? Now, I don't know if it really can for Charles. I mean, he's won Monaco this year. He won Monza. I think that if you told him at the beginning of the year those were going to be his only two wins on the season, I think he would have picked those two tracks. But that said, I think we're going to see Charles Leclerc perform very, very well around Baku. It always seems like he has, up to speed on this track in seasons past, really propelling that Ferrari past, really what that car is really capable of. We've definitely seen him overperform the car here in seasons past, and I think we're going to see him carry the momentum of a Monza win into another good weekend here in Azerbaijan. I do think it's very possible, and I think it's going to happen. I mean, he just always seems to be doing very, very well around here. We saw him kind of podium out of nowhere last season, and I think we could be on for another special weekend from Charles this weekend. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comment section below. Let's move things right along to my pick for biggest disappointment this weekend, and this one is going to take a little bit of explaining because I have a thought process here and it makes sense to me, so I'm interested to see what you guys think. For this weekend, I have gone for Oscar Piastri as my biggest disappointment. And now I know what you're saying. Oscar is driving unbelievably well since we got back from the summer break. He has been very on the pace and is not making a lot of the same mistakes we've seen in weekends past. And I think Oscar is driving probably one of, if not the best second half of the seasons that I've seen since I started watching. I think he's driving particularly well right now, but I think this is where we're going to see the disappointment come in. McLaren took a lot of flack in Italy, and obviously they decided not to prioritize Lando in his fight for the World Drivers' Championship. McLaren still take really good points off of Red Bull in terms of the Constructors' Championship, but at this point, I don't think the Constructors' Championship is really in doubt. I think they're like 8 points behind Red Bull at this point, and I think it's literally their title to lose the rest of this year. That said, there is still an interesting point in fighting for the Drivers' Championship. Lando Lando was, within, striking distance, especially with Max not having a particularly good weekend around Monza, finishing down the order and nowhere near the top 3. So McLaren took a lot of flack over that weekend where they didn't prioritize Lando in his fight for the championship. And so I think this week leading up to this race, we had seen them talk about how they would potentially use team orders going forward to help Lando in his fight for the Drivers' Championship. Now that said, I think this is where the disappointment comes in, because I think Oscar is going to have a stronger weekend than Lando, but I think it's going to come down to McLaren ruining his weekend from him and really taking it and giving Lando basically the entire preferential treatment, causing Oscar to really fall down the order and not finish as high up as he could. And so it's going to be a biggest disappointment for Oscar, but I think it's going to become at the hands of McLaren. What do you think? Let's move on to qualifying at top 3. We'll start with my pick for P3 in qualifying, and we're going to stick with the Scuderia Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. Now, I think this is going to be the first step in the weekend towards Charles showing what sort of mastery he seems to have around Baku. I don't think that the Ferrari is going to perform particularly strong around this circuit. I think it kind of behaves a little bit like Monza, where it's all about straight line speed and kind of getting out of those traction zones as best as possible. And I don't think that, the Ferrari is one of the better cars on the grid. They are firmly in the upper half of Formula A. That said, we have not really seen them perform at the top and at their peak of the grid, because that spot has been firmly taken a hold of by McLaren. But that said, we are going to Baku, and like I mentioned in biggest positive surprise, Charles just seems to always have the measure of this circuit, and I think it's going to show again here as he puts a P3 in qualifying and onwards towards a very good position to try and make something happen in the Grand Prix on Sunday. So I think it's all going to start there. As we move now to P2, and I think it's going to be the first catalyst to my other earlier prediction we talked about, Oscar Piastri in P2. I think Oscar is going to jump in and want to really take the weekend for himself. I think it's going to start on Saturday as he puts in a banger of a lap to start on the front row. We saw him perform very well in qualifying around Monza, also starting next to Lando, also in P2 once again. And I think we could see something similar happen here. In fact, I'm predicting it'll be exactly the same, that we'll see Oscar qualify P2 in this one, putting him on the front row next to my surprise pick for pole position. This one, I couldn't tell you why I exactly picked it. It just feels like it's about that time for something crazy to happen. George Russell. I'm going to let that one sink in for a second. This one, if you had asked me to pick this pole position 10 out of 10 times, I might pick George maybe once. I think this is just one of those things where George just seems to have qualifying, and it's about time we see a George qualifying lap that just makes us all scratch our head. We saw him perform decently in qualifying last year before we ended up seeing him and Verstappen kind of go toe-to-toe in the first few corners. And so I think we could see George kind of do something similar here, where all of a sudden we're looking at McLaren, we're looking at Ferrari, we're looking at Red Bull, and then all of a sudden you get to the end of Q3 and there he is, George Russell, sitting at the top of the timesheet, taking pole position. Am I crazy? Maybe. Do I think it's going to happen? Also, maybe. I could see it happen. I don't know if I would be shocked or expectant of George to put it on pole position, but for whatever reason it spoke to me in a dream, and so I'm gonna shoot my shot here. This is one of my biggest crazy predictions of the season, and realistically I could have put this at our final prediction as we're coming up to here in a bit, but I think George Russell is gonna put it on pole position for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Let's move now. The race on Sunday, our podium predictions, our top 3. We're starting in P3. We're going with the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton. Now this pick goes entirely with the meme of if you put George on pole and put Lewis in P20, somehow they'll end up on track together. And as history has shown, Lewis will finish ahead. I think this is going to be another one of those instances where, George put it in my universe, George putting it on pole position will put him out of position relative to the other cars. I think we could see him get tangled up in the fight for P1 at the start, potentially causing him to drop back. And I think Lewis will be there to take advantage if that does happen, as he always just seems to find himself up the order at the end of the Grand Prix, even if his qualifying doesn't go perfectly. So P3, Lewis Hamilton. Moving on to my pick for P2 in this weekend, I've gone for Charles Leclerc. I think this is another one of those instances where we'll see Charles just kind of be there to take advantage of things going on around him. We saw it over the history in Baku, basically the catalyst for his inclusion amongst all of my predictions. He just always seems to find himself in the right spot at the right time, with others having their own moments impacting each other's races, that he's always just there left at the end to snag a podium. So P2, Charles Leclerc, rounding out a fantastic weekend for Charles. And then rounding out the winner of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, we're wrapping it up with a neat little bow. I've been setting this one up from the jump, Lando Norris. I think this is going to be the exact culmination of what we see with McLaren, prioritizing him in the championship. I think we'll see him finish at the front. I think we'll see Max not finish on the podium in an attempt to try and revitalize the way that this season is going to end, with Lando winning, probably taking the fastest lap, as he's taken the fastest lap on the final lap of the last couple of Grand Prix. And so it'll be an exciting finish to the weekend, seeing him continue to charge and try and close that gap to Max with, I believe, what will be 6 or 7 rounds left after this one is over. Is going to come down to the wire, and I think this is going to be the culmination of McLaren prioritizing him over Oscar. And I think this is where the disappointment for Oscar is also going to come in, starting on the front row but not finishing on the podium. I think it'll be tough to watch. I, for one, am not going to be a fan of it, but I do think this could be something that happens, because Lando and that McLaren are definitely, the good combination of the best car on the grid and a good enough driver to take advantage should he make it work. We saw it in Zandvoort, and I think we could see it again this weekend around the streets of Azerbaijan. And then rounding things out, our one crazy prediction. This one I've gone for a driver and a team I have not mentioned literally once in this entire video, which actually turns out to be a lot of teams. No, it's not Aston Martin, who recently signed Adrian Newey. Congratulations, Aston Martin fans. I think that was it's a leak that's been floating around for a couple of weeks now at this point. But at the same time, you never know until the ink hits paper, and it officially was announced today, as of this recording, that he was joining Aston Martin. So congratulations to you and your fans. I'm excited to see what he's able to produce for Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll in 2026 and beyond. So get excited. Going to be a good one. But that said, that's not our one crazy prediction. My one crazy prediction has to do with my beloved Haas team. That's right, Oliver Behrman, filling in for the race band Kevin Magnussen, is going to finish in the points this weekend around the streets of Baku. Count on it, book it, take it to the bank. Oliver Behrman, a point scorer once again in Formula One, this time for his second team in this very season. Obviously filled in for Carlos Sainz around Jeddah earlier in the season, finished in the top 10 there. I think we're going to see him finish in the points once again as he jumps into the car for the first time around a full Grand Prix weekend in the team he's going to be driving for next season. I think we're going to start off on a right foot, and I think we're going to be very, very excited at his prospects going forward next season. But there it is, guys. That is my predictions and my community's predictions for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix here in 2024. What do you think of my predictions? Let me know down in the comment section below. If you made it this far into the video, please like the video, as it really helps me out with the almighty YouTube algorithm. And once again, subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be back after the Grand Prix weekend is over. And as always, you can find all my socials down in the links below as we talk and chat about the Grand Prix weekend, as well as in the Discord, where a lot of discourse gets thrown around depending on what happens on track. I hope you guys enjoy the Grand Prix weekend. I know I'm going to. I'm treasuring every single one the rest of this year, as it has turned into an absolute classic end of a season, as a season none of us expected to go quite the way it is. But guys, that's going to do it for me here in this one. I'll see you in the next one.